How's our internet, Robert?
Good.
All right, we can get started.
Awesome.
It was moving a little slowly earlier today, so we're ready just in case. But so first, very brief background. I think most of you, already know this, but CRWA was founded in 1965 by a group of people who were not willing to accept the conventional wisdom that the river could never be cleaned up from Natick to Boston. And for those of you who grew up in the area like I did, you remember when it reeked of sewage and when there was trash and when there would be, fecal matter that was clearly recognizable. And no one would have wanted to develop the seaport or the Esplanade, as a place to enjoy, to spend some time. So we've come a long way. We are an interdisciplinary staff with a lot of folks with a science background, advocacy, communications, and we're going to get to this a little bit later, but we are. We have a definition of watershed later. So, okay, Robert, keep going. In terms of what we want to do tonight, we did the introduction, so we're already off to a good start. We want to talk about what you've already done when it comes to climate resilience, the impacts that you're already seeing, and that I'm sure will be just photos that are very familiar to you. And then where we see opportunities, and where we see opportunities for projects, where we see opportunities for policies, where we see opportunities for funding. And then hopefully if we do this right, we've left some time for discussion. In the meantime, we're hoping to get through things relatively quickly. If you have comments along the way, it's totally fine to jump in, or if you want, alternatively, you could put it into the chat. But we'll definitely get to, the goal is to get to, have a full and robust discussion. So we'll start out with a poll, which should pop up if this works correctly, with a couple questions for you that'll just be helpful for the discussion. Number one, how often do your constituents raise climate-related issues to you, constituents or residents? And then how familiar are you with the MS4 permit? Is the poll working for everyone? All right, there we go.
Everybody.
Okay, so there's some concerns have been raised, not a groundswell, it sounds like, of concerns around climate, and there is some, and I bet I can guess who the very is, recognition of the MS4 permit. That's super helpful. Thank you. And like I said, this is very timely discussion because you may be familiar already from having spoken with, folks in Congress, but we have money, we have earmarks for the first time in many years. So our congressional representatives are actively seeking suggestions for funding. We have the infrastructure bill that will be coming in coming months, is what we're hearing, with lots of money available for a lot of things, but including water infrastructure and the things we're going to be talking about. And then of course, there are state grants. There is the MVP process that you're already part of. DER, Department of Ecological Restoration, has funding. So there are other funding sources as well. We want to help you access those funds. And we'll just start out with defining our terms. You're probably familiar with this, but in terms of climate change, it's generally divided into mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation being, what do we do to reduce the causes of climate change, reducing fossil fuel burning, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're not going to be talking about that as much by itself tonight. In my old days at Sierra Club, that's what I focused on more. And then adaptation. Climate change is here, it's coming. Even if we stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow, the impacts are here. We need to protect people, we need to respond. And then they actually intersect, because some of the things that we promote in terms of climate adaptation, particularly nature-based solutions, just for an example, planting trees. Trees reduces flooding, trees reduces, helps with heat island, but also sequesters carbon. And we have a history of working with Waltham. This was before my time. Actually, the embassy parking lot was after I had started. But the Waltham Watch Factory is a wonderful project when the area got redeveloped, and it has some significant benefits to stormwater and climate change resilience in terms of the permeable pavers and the rain gardens and so on. So that we're really proud of that project and that partnership with you. The embassy parking lot, you may be familiar. So we have put together designs. We worked with you all and a consulting firm to put together designs. Hasn't been constructed, and we would love to take that next step. And that is actually a perfect example of a quote unquote shovel ready project that could get federal funding or state funding. So that is a clear next step that we would love to have with you. We also worked together, and we really appreciated the funding from the City of Waltham on the water chestnut removal program. As you may recall, close to 10 years ago or so, it was such a bad problem that people using the kayakers, canoers could almost not even get through various parts of the river. And thanks to your funding and now more regular funding from the state, that is much less of a problem. It's still something that we have to do every year, and we're excited with the volunteers and the corporate groups that go out and participate in our water chestnut removal. But we were really grateful to your support that kicked that off. And I think Robert, take over.
Thank you, Emily. So just some background of what you all have been doing in Waltham. Back in 2019, the City of Waltham received a Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, or MVP, planning grant, which it used to create a joint MVP and hazard mitigation plan. In the hazard mitigation plan is part of a FEMA process, or Federal Emergency Management Agency program, which involves, number one, identifying the risks and vulnerabilities associated with natural disasters, as well as developing long-term strategies for protecting people and property from future hazard events. And this planning process is important because maintaining the status of these combined plans ensures that Waltham is eligible for FEMA grant funding, as well as state MVP action grant funding, which you all have applied for. And these pictures show two of the planning sessions with the core team. And we thank the City of Waltham for inviting CRWA team to participate in the process. So what did this team do? One of the things they did is the core team identified the vulnerable populations in the city, including older adults, the infirmed, people with language barriers, homeless population, student population, undocumented people, nonprofits assisting those populations, as well as working people and people without resources. And the bread and pudding of this report was that the core team found the top hazards and priority actions that the city should take to address climate change and natural hazards. The top hazards they found was that storms cause high winds that can result in fallen trees and branches, which can damage property, create hazardous driving conditions, disrupt power services. You all are familiar with all these windstorms and things happening around the Commonwealth. Additionally, winter storms create citywide hazards of power outages, hazard driving and walking conditions, frozen pipes, and much more issues. Additionally, another hazard they found was increased temperatures, which can increase the risk of vector-borne diseases, like from mosquitoes, air pollution, as well as more proliferation of invasive species like the water chestnut. Some priority actions that the city is looking to take included implementation of restoration and stormwater improvements, which will help reduce the impact of flooding surrounding many streams and rivers, including Beaver Brook, Chester Brook, and the Charles River. And also, we recognize that Waltham is not only taking action via the MVP process. You're doing great work to increase walkability and biking in the city, as well as improving infrastructure through initiatives like the Western Gateway and the Wayside Trail to help create connectivity through your city for walking and biking, as well as your Waltham Resilient Stormwater Action and Implementation Plan, which was part of the MVP process, and you all were awarded $217,000 to help do that as an action grant via the MVP process back in 2020, as well as healthy streets and initiatives to help walking and biking throughout the city. And now I'm going to hand it off to Julie to talk about the MS4 permit.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, it seems like this can be a quick update since that poll question showed that everybody's at least somewhat familiar with the MS4 permit. This is a permit program that's about 20 years old. Prior to the MS4 permit becoming into existence, it was only large cities that had requirements to manage their stormwater runoff. But obviously, lots of smaller cities have a lot of impervious cover, which create a lot of stormwater runoff. And so for the last 20 years or so, that has been a requirement that the City of Waltham has faced. However, in 2016, a new permit was issued, many of you probably know, went into effect a few years later and made some changes through a litigation process. But it is now final, and the City of Waltham and all the cities across the Charles have definitely increased requirements on stormwater management from the previous permit. And one of these increased requirements does focus on the phosphorus reduction, which you can see is listed as 60%. So that is a pretty high target. That is a pretty high bar that the City of Waltham will have to reduce 60% of the phosphorus in its stormwater runoff. Later in the presentation, we're going to be talking about nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, and lots of great ways to do that. That'll also build climate resilience and hopefully meet some of your other community goals. I would say the plus side, though, with Waltham having so much river frontage, you do also stand significantly to benefit from such a cleaner Charles. And it's towns all across the watershed that are going to be making these pollution reductions in their stormwater. So over the next 20 years, we really do expect to see some great improvements in water quality, and particularly with the reduction of nutrient pollution, the reduction of some of those impacts, such as invasive species and the toxic algae blooms that we've been getting in the summers. I think it's back to you, Robert.
Thank you, Julie. When we're thinking about MS4 obligations and flooding in the city, it's good to note that Waltham has a much higher percentage of hard impervious surfaces like parking lots, blacktop, concrete, where the stormwater and the rainwater runs directly off into our waterways. And the graph shows the percentage of impervious surfaces on the y-axis up and down. In the larger bars, the more impervious surfaces there are in the community. And the x-axis shows the watershed from low impervious surfaces on the left to high on the right. And Waltham is, as you can see in the green right there, you know, it's in the higher parts of the watershed. And this shouldn't be that much of a surprise to folks because we know Waltham has more urbanized areas, more parking lots, that sort of thing. But this just shows in context with your neighboring communities. So what does this mean? Because of all the concentration of impervious covers combined with other factors like loss of floodplains, we're seeing flooding in some of the more urbanized areas of the city surrounding Beaver Brooks, Chesterbrook, as you can see in the pictures here from flooding in 2018 and 2010 on Linden Street. And back in 2010, the severe flooding actually caused evacuations on Linden Street. If you probably remember, they had to use high water vehicles like this front end loader to offload people off of 99 Linden Street. And also there's significant flooding on Oakley Lane, as you see on the left. And then just here's another example of flooding in the city. This is from Prospect Street up in the Charles River, upstream of the Moody Street Dam back in 2018. Next one is in March of 2010. I don't know if you remember this huge storm. It was 3 days of precipitation, had record level high water table levels in the Charles River, and the Moody Street Dam was threatened, and it necessitated, we had to have emergency evacuations, emergency response because the dam was threatened to fail. We got Governor Deval Patrick and the mayor here. Back in 2010, they were checking it out. And on the left, we got the director of flood control management for DCR, who was performing maintenance over here on the dam and make sure water levels could come down. Here's a view downstream of the dam, if you're familiar with the area, really high water levels. And here's some more pictures of the dam. You all had to open up temporary housing to evacuees. And thankfully the dam was bolstered by sandbags and boulders. and it held, so it didn't breach, thank God. But it just showed that we have issues with infrastructure and dams in the river that we really need to be taking a hard look at. So looking at other issues in risks in Waltham, flooding is not the only concern identified in your MVP plan in Waltham. You have concerns about extreme heat and temperatures. The impervious surfaces, which are contributors to flooding risks, the dark cover, blacktop, asphalt roofs, etc. They retain heat from the sun and contribute to the urban heat island effect. And this can become deadly, like in the 1995 Chicago heat wave, where we saw over 739 heat-related deaths. So we got to be, thinking critically about these things. All right. So you may be wondering, how did we get here? So let's look at some history. We're going back to 1831. If you look at the map here, if you notice the red circle that I highlighted, that is where Beaver Brook and Chester Brook are. And if you notice in the map, see where my cursor is, there's a lot of floodplains. The streams are meandering. There's not very much development around the brooks. And these areas were developed on top of it because of streams' ability to produce power to run the mills and factories that power the Industrial Revolution. But you can tell the difference. And then we're going to flip forward 45 years, 1875, 1877. You look at the map, I'm going to highlight the two areas of Beaver Brook and Chester Brook. And you notice a lot more development in those areas. Next slide is, so I'm highlighting a couple of things. We cannot forget the history of systemic racism that continues to stay. The photo on the left shows the redlining map where people were actively denied loans by banks and where resources like, including infrastructure, were not prioritized. The blue areas were prioritized. And this builds on work from Groundworks Lawrence. And it shows the roots of environmental injustice come from systemic racism. And this should not be no surprise. If you look on the picture on the right, that's a map of the environmental justice neighborhoods in Waltham. And in yellow is minority neighborhoods, and green is minority and low income. And these communities are more likely to host toxic facilities, higher concentration of pollution, and have a higher risk of flooding. And as you know, the neighborhoods are in red circles are adjacent to the Moody Street Dam and are impacted by flooding from the Charles and higher in risk of dam failure. So you can see comparing where the redlining was to what we have today. All right. And now that we have some background on some of the history, we're going to transition to today and the future. And one way we can look at what is going on today is through our conservation tool we developed in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. This tool takes a traditional land conservation practices and brings in climate benefits. It's designed for urban and developed areas, and you can filter out land use, critical habitat, environmental justice areas, flood risk, and infrastructure. And this will help us generate priority areas to conserve and restore, and help us analyze for future climate change. And you can see on the right that in the purple, that is, we ran the tool, and that shows different areas that were under the 100 and 500 year floodplain and included former wetlands. So we ran the tool, and in the red, that is the highest areas of concentration value for wildlife, flood protection, and environmental justice. And I'm highlighting two of the areas along Beaver Brook and Chester Brook that will be benefited from being conserved. So you can, we could talk later, and you can notice these parcels could be important to conserve for those benefits. So now I'm going to transition over to Julie to talk about nature-based solutions.
Thanks, Robert. Sorry for any background noise. I do have little ones here. So we are really focused on nature-based solutions. in our work, as I know Waltham has been working towards as well, these are systems that use natural systems and natural processes in our built environment to help us be more resilient and more environmentally friendly. And so we know we're not going to go back to that first map that Robert showed where no one lived in Waltham and the streams flowed freely and wetlands everywhere. We know we're not going to go back there, but what can we incorporate into our built environment that brings those natural processes and natural cycles and essentially mimics that natural system that we see in that original map? And these, there's a lot of different nature-based opportunities. We've listed a few and Robert's gonna go back through that might be particular opportunities for Waltham. But big picture, another really important reason to prioritize nature-based solutions is they tend to have a lot more co-benefits or a lot of co-benefits. So if you use a nature-based system, for example, to address a flooding issue, you're also going to get cleaner air, cleaner water, more animal habitat, recreational opportunities, aesthetic improvements. And so it really is kind of a, not a one size fits all, but a 1-2 punch maybe. you can solve, multi-solve is a problem, a term I've heard. So you can solve many problems at once with these kind of systems.
Great, thank you, Julie. So dam removal is one of the examples of a nature-based solution that we can implement here in Waltham. This map shows all of the dams in Waltham. This is from state, and the red boxes are high hazard dams, green are low hazard, and white are non-jurisdictional dams, which means they're below 6 feet tall. And I'm highlighting 3 pairs of dams that I think we're going to go into a little more detail about that currently serve no real purpose, such as flood control or water supply, that could be good candidates to be restored. And you may be thinking, why would we remove dams? You know, dam removal is really important because it restores the stream channel, aquatic connectivity for fish to migrate up and downstream, as well as eliminates the risk of dam failure downstream, like what happened in 2010 in that evacuation that had happened in Waltham. It also helps connect the movement of sediment that gets trapped behind the dams, and know that there is some sedimentation issues in some of the brooks in Waltham from reading your plans. So the most significant dam in Waltham that should be considered for removal is the Moody Street Dam. It's a high hazard dam identified by the Office of Dam Safety, if you remember seeing the little red dot. And the status of high hazard was also identified in your MVP and hazard mitigation plan for the risk of catastrophic failure as seen in the risk back in 2010. And this dam creates an increased flood risk upstream of the dam, as you saw during the 2010 flood and 2018. And there's critical facilities like the MBTA commuter rail station in neighborhoods nearby that are in the flood prone areas. There's also a small dam right downstream called Bleacher Dam, which CRWA and DCR partially breached in 2005. And the photo on the right is just an example of a dam removal in Pittsfield. Moving on to another pair of dams, we're looking at 2 dams up in Belmont. So they're upstream of Waltham on the Beaver Brook, but they do impact you all if they were to breach. Both are non-jurisdictional, so they're under 6 feet tall. They're owned by the state at DCR, and they do not have a mandatory annual inspection, but the people can inspect them on their own. And they date back to 1662 and 1690, and they've had improvements back in 1898, according to DCR's Beaver Brook Reservation Resource Management Plan. And that management plan also identified that these 2 dams are both in poor condition and therefore are potential good candidates for removal. And here's just some more pictures. This is a mill pond, and you can see here's the dam up here. Here's the outlet of the dam on the left and the impoundment on the right. And the last pair of dams are the Lyman Pond dams on Chester Brook near Bentley University. These pictures are located down here in the red, just for reference if people don't know where this is. And these are defunct mill dams. And if you notice on the image on the right, the inlet structure there, there's a lot of debris that's caught in there, trash and the like, which is a concern. However, these dams are not publicly owned. They're owned by a private dam owner. So if you all are interested as a city looking at removing these, you'd have to cooperate with the dam owner, who would probably have to pay most of the dam removal. But the state does work with private dam owners and public dam owners to remove dams. Additionally, Beaver and Chester Brooks have sections that are extremely channelized, have blacktop parking lots all around them and impervious surfaces, which make it for great opportunities for stream restoration and other nature-based solutions that Julie talked about. We don't have any specific evaluation of these sites yet, but we've done similar work at Cheesecake Brook in Newton, as well as Fullerbrook and Wellesley. That could be a case study if you all are interested in the private owners and whoever owns the land in these areas. Here's Beaver Brook, similar thing. The pictures are at that red area. A good candidate to implement these project solutions like stream restoration and the like. So I'm going to pass it off to Julie to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Newton with stream restoration.
Excellent, thanks, Robert. Yeah, we partner with the City of Newton to look at Cheesecake Brook, which is an extremely channelized brook, runs completely straight as an arrow, nothing you'd ever find naturally, and has armored banks on both sides, as you can see in this top profile. And our project involved engaging the community in a community visioning and planning process to see how we might naturalize the brook, improve brook quality, improve habitat quality, while also providing some additional flood storage. In the case of the Cheesecake Brook, it runs through a city park. So it is publicly owned land surrounding the brook, and there is some space right around there. So it was maybe a little bit more of an opportunity or an obvious opportunity site than when you have the impervious cover that Robert showed. But obviously any brook can benefit from this kind of opportunity. So you can see in the bottom profile, in the bottom profile, the banks are no longer straight, they're vegetated. The level of the stream can easily rise and fall without it overtopping its banks and spilling all over into the park. It's a much more natural system designed to have flood zones. And then the next one, Robert, shows just a nice little schematic picture of what that might look like. So you can get a sense of the park. Right now it's just mowed grass right down to the banks. Very little shade along the brook. As I said, straight as an arrow. So we looked at putting in some more naturalization, putting in some vegetated buffers, putting in some shading, providing a lot of habitat benefits, and then really improving this park and just making the stream a more natural and integrated part of the park. So that's just a conceptual plan at this point, but the community got really excited about it. So we're hoping to possibly move forward with that. And then I think the next example, next slide. Oh, okay. No, the next, shifting topics a tiny bit. We spoke a lot about tangible projects and infrastructure, but that's really not the only way to build climate resilience. Policy and practice is a huge part of it. And we at CRWA have created a climate resilience toolkit, which is now hosted on our website, newly live actually. And so we wanted to highlight a few elements that might be relevant to Waltham, but we hope you really will check it all out. So Waltham has a stormwater bylaw already. We have some stormwater bylaw recommendations in the toolkit if you're interested in checking those out. We also have local wetlands bylaws, and that is not something Waltham has adopted yet. So that might be worth checking out. Local wetlands bylaws can help you kind of personalize your regulations, personalize your controls for your community. They can build upon what the state requires. As you know, you can't make them less stringent, but you can expand to some areas. The state protections do have some gaps. So a lot of communities do take on these local wetlands bylaws so that they can kind of fill in those gaps and personalize it to their communities, notably including Boston. So obviously there's former Mayor Walsh at the announcement of the Boston local wetlands ordinance. Now he's off in Washington. And another one that might be worth looking at for Waltham is tree protection bylaw. Obviously with a very developed and quickly developing community, trees can be a tricky issue. One of the most important things we can do though is protect our mature, healthy trees and really prevent the loss of those trees. So a local tree bylaw can help you do something like that. Some towns have gone as far as to regulate trees on private property as well. Usually it would include a permitting process for tree removal. And then if you do take trees down, paying into a mitigation fund for any trees that are lost. Next slide. Another thing the toolkit might help you with is information and resources on stormwater bylaws, or excuse me, stormwater utilities. Most people when they, or at least those in the higher levels of government, when they think of the MS4, often they just think of the price tag. And certainly there is a price tag associated with implementing the MS4 and the requirements in that. And that can be a challenge if you don't have a dedicated revenue stream. So a stormwater utility can give you that revenue stream. Essentially the way residents pay for water and sewer services that the city provides, they would now pay an additional fee for stormwater. And so there's different ways that communities are doing that. Many communities charge by the amount of impervious surface on a property. Some communities think that's just a little too technical and just go straight by, one fee for residential, one fee for commercial. 22 communities across the Commonwealth have these, and we have seen a few more pop up in our watershed more recently. Other things the toolkit includes are information on reviewing your local municipal plans, like the climate and hazard mitigation and open space plan and recreation plans. And please feel free to reach out to CRWA if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for our toolkit. All right, and with that, we're gonna put you back on the spot again. I am going to pull up our second poll here. What is your biggest challenge in implementing climate adaptation measures or projects? And do you have regular communication with your upstream and downstream neighbors about climate change adaptation?
The second question is foreshadowing.
All right, we got two responses. Other folks want to answer or no opinions? All right. Oh, there we go.
We got 4 or 5. One more.
Right. All right, let's see what we got here. Okay. So biggest challenge, funding, and one vote for funding, 2 votes for lack of public support. Other, does anybody want to share their other? Either unmute or share it in the chat.
Sure. The other is, since I'm on the ZBA, I don't really enact things. I just apply the zoning ordinance and related regulations, and those are pretty much silent on climate change and resilience. So it would be that would be my obstacle. I would love to see specific, that to be a standard contained within the zoning ordinance, within either in the state or local level.
Excellent. Yeah, great point. And this one is unanimous. No upstream, downstream communication. Okay.
Wait, did anyone respond to that one?
Yeah, everyone said no.
No, right. I don't know if
yeah.
people think so. Right.
Okay, you're more than halfway through the polls. Okay, so obviously we are a watershed association, and that means we take a watershed perspective. But what is that? The river is 80 miles long, runs from Hopkinton to Boston, much like the marathon, but takes a very meandering route, hence the 80 miles, not 26. But the drainage basin, the land that drains to the basin, is 308 square miles. And that includes all or part of 35 cities and towns. As you all know, lots of decisions are made on the municipal level in Massachusetts. It's also a very developed area, almost 1 million residents. So there is a lot going on in the watershed, and it's also fairly diverse. You saw the impervious cover graph that Robert showed. Some towns, very minimal development, and then of course some towns, the densest in the state, or the most urban in the state. However, this is how the water moves. And if we're talking about flooding and water quality, there's just no way not to acknowledge it. There's no way to really think about this as a different scale. Even though our governance takes place on political boundaries, the river and the water doesn't really understand that, and they have their own different boundaries. Next slide. So we've started what we call our Charles River Climate Compact, which brings together municipal staff that are working on climate adaptation planning from all across the watershed. Currently, we have 22 communities participating, always happy to have more. We meet quarterly. Now it's all on Zoom. We try to get interesting speakers. We try to share we try to learn from one another. And then we also take on projects, collaborative projects that are taken on at the regional scale. So the current project we're working on is a watershed model to understand where flooding is occurring in the watershed, and where flooding is occurring now and where flooding might get worse as we get climate change. Oh, sorry, small visitor. As we get more impacts from climate change. So we have 15 communities working with us on that now. It's funded by that same MVP Action Grant program. The model will be developed, or is being developed as we speak, and this project will end in June 30th. So all the results will be done by then.
Put a fine point on it. Of the 15, Julie, is Waltham one of them?
No. But we're already talking about the next round, so we'd love to have you.
Yeah, it's important to note that you guys are doing that at the same time we're doing a similar type of project in Waltham. So we're working at the same time. So and we also, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but we also have the same consultant, Weston and Sampson. So that's nice because Weston and Sampson could kind of put it all together with the hydraulics and things like that. But they did a pretty extensive study, and they're finishing up in June, as probably you guys are in June, right? With the
yes.
MVP program. Yeah. So they're doing all, what we are analyzing all our streams and brooks. And so we have a lot of information in green infrastructure as well. There's a lot of recommendations for that. So
fabulous.
Yeah, I know we're sort of more coordinated than we realize, because we are both having both models in Weston and Sampson's
yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, will help. Yep. And so this project is fairly similar. It's a much larger area, so it is will be a little less detailed in this phase. but we will do the same. We will assess the flood mitigation impacts of some nature-based solutions. And by looking at it at the watershed scale, similar to how Waltham looked at it just at the town scale, we can find opportunities possibly to store more water upstream, so that, we don't see those kind of volumes coming over the Moody Street Dam, like we see in those March 2010 photos, or even worse.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities in Waltham. They did a preliminary right now. I just reviewed a preliminary. They're finishing things up, but they identified like 305 green infrastructure projects in Waltham. So it seems like they're finding plenty of opportunities. So that's good. Obviously, we can't do 305 green infrastructure projects. We'll have to prioritize, but it's nice that there's plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, and I think at the watershed scale, we'll be in the similar boat. We'll get some good results, same as you, by June. And then probably one of the things we'll want to look to do in the next phase is prioritize those, and so that we can set ourselves up for funding and implementing some. All right. Well, we're quickly approaching or slightly past our discussion time. So just one last poll. Maybe it'll help even get discussion started. Poll number 3. An easy yes or no one to end on. All right.
There is a right or wrong here.
All right, good. So mostly yes. One person, maybe not helpful for everyone, but that's good. Good to see 80% yes. Okay. So with that, we will wrap up. Robert, do you want to read any questions from the chat, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I just stopped sharing my screen.
Yeah, I've been having a great back and forth with Councillor Darcy. But for the recording, it would be good to read them and respond verbally as well. The chat doesn't show up as well on the recording.
Right.
Zoom hasn't figured that out yet, to transcribe all of the chat, although maybe that would be dangerous.
Yeah, great. So George, great comment from George Darcy. We tried to implement a wetland bylaw in Waltham a decade ago, but it's stalled in City Council. Perhaps we can try again in 2021. Be great to get some samples from other cities and towns. Do you want to say anything else about that, George?
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Great, yeah, so we tried, I submitted the wetlands bylaw, I think it was 2010 or so, but it stalled. There wasn't the appetite from the sitting city councilors. I think it's different now. We have a whole new cast of characters, and I think they're much more progressive than a decade ago. So I'd be more than willing to resubmit that again. And to that point, if you have any sample bylaws that you have that I could reference, that'd be great as we embark down this road again.
Yes, we can definitely do that. And it may be one of those things that the world in Waltham wasn't really ready 10 years ago, but the different council with different reality, we didn't show the slides for the sake of time of scary climate change, data, but it's a bit more dire. And I think most people recognize that 11 years later. Yep.
And to that point, I mean, I put it in the chat, but we have a great project coming forward at the Fernald State School, which the city acquired in 2014. In the northwest quadrant of that Fernald School is where the state had constructed the cottages in response to Judge Taro's decision back in the 70s, in the 80s. We removed all the cottages, and we're in the process, the city is in the process of actually restoring, daylighting a culverted stream and restoring the pond that the state had filled in And mind you, this was after the state's Wetlands Protection Act, which was 1972. But we have the detailed construction plans, and we're hoping to break ground on it on that project this year, and that could hold up to 2 million gallons right above the intersection of where the Chester Brook meets the Beaver Brook. So,
oh, that's fabulous.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, I think we'd love to see more details, and give you all a shout out for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I would I can send you over the preliminary design by Sam Bade, and I can also send you a couple of articles, and maybe you'd want to include that. Do you have a newsletter that you issue?
We do. We call it Changing the Current. And we're always looking for success stories and things to, because, and I'm sure you can appreciate this as a counselor, I know I do as a Newton City councilor, is that we're always looking to other communities. What are you doing? What are you doing? And either replicating or trying to avoid, but in this case, trying to replicate. So being able to share that would be fabulous.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. I'd be more than happy to write something up for that.
Okay, wonderful.
Great. Mark had a question. Maybe you can answer this one, Robert. Is the conservation tool highlighted at the beginning of the presentation something that is available for us to use?
Yes, yep, it is available on the CRWA website. I'm going to put it in the chat right now, the link to it, but I also will follow up with the conservation tool in the follow-up email going out tomorrow to you all, as well as our climate resilience toolkit, which Julie talked about, which includes some sample bylaws for wetlands, trees, and other things like stormwater utility information. So I'm going to put it in the chat.
And that was the last question in, Councillor Darcy says, I have a question about breaching dams in Waltham. Go ahead.
So the largest dam in Waltham is the Moody Street Dam. You mentioned the Bleach Tree, which was they breached a section of it back a few years back. Could you explain to me how would the entire dam be breached, or would they just take a section of it? What is typically done? Because that's a pretty substantial dam, and we haven't really addressed the issue that was confronted to us back when 10 years ago, when the dam almost was destroyed. And I know that in between then, there was a gentleman that came before the city council to do micro hydro. So I don't know if there's a dam expert on the Zoom call, but what do other dams, what happens with other dams that are similar to what we have in Waltham as far as the breaching?
Yeah. I am far from a dam expert, but I can give you some some big picture answers. Removing the Moody Street Dam will be a challenge. It's owned by DCR. They can be a little challenging to work with. We have partnered with them on a feasibility study to look at removing the Watertown Dam, not even necessarily remove it, but just look at whether or not that might be an option. And it has been a little slow. Obviously, DCR has a lot of recreational and programming priorities on their end, and so that process has been a little slow. So reaching out to them would absolutely be the first step. The other challenge that you may face with the Moody Street is they do control water levels using those flashboards. So that would be something that you'd have to kind of investigate a little bit more and see what kind of is the role of the dam with the water levels upstream, and then that kind of leads into the other big challenge that is a challenge for all dam removals, community engagement and community support. Depending on exactly how much those flashboards are being moved and manipulated and controlling the water level upstream. People do live right on the river up there. They do have docks in there. The canoe and kayak location is right upstream there. And so we've been partnering with another municipality in the upper watershed to look at a dam removal for a dam that has a tiny impoundment and just 3 houses on it. And I'll just be honest, we are getting a lot of pushback, a lot of pushback on that. So that does tend to be the biggest challenge, is the community engagement. But in this case, you know, reaching out to DCR and seeing if they're willing and interested to look at the technical aspects of it would at least get you over some hurdles, because then you could kind of understand what's going on with the water levels, what's going on with the sediment behind, you know, what are DCR's goals and priorities for this, given all, you know, given their statewide agency and all their other goals and priorities.
And to be clear, we would want to be a partner for you. We would want to offer the support of, here's the scientific, you know, and climate benefits and habitat benefits and so forth. So we would do that. We're not saying that we would leave you hanging, but just, I think Julie's trying to, you know, paint a realistic picture that some dams are easier than others, and DCR dams are not among the easier ones to get on the path to remove.
Right. I had a friend that had a company on Benefit Street, and he lost everything when the problem occurred 10 years ago or so. So it's a problem that we're going to have to address at some point in the future. Either we firm up the dam or we take the dam out, but it's going to confront us regardless of what we do or not do. So
and it would be great to do that without waiting for that next disaster to hit.
Right. Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the DCR, I'd be happy just to get some operating information from DCR, but that's even difficult to get. I reached out to them and just to try to get some operational information on how they, you know, move those weirs or boards or whatever they are up and down, and I'm still waiting. So
we can try to help with that as well.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Because then I have a couple for you all. In terms of next steps, we are happy to, would love to be able to have this engagement with additional leaders in Waltham, happy to get onto the official city council agenda, maybe a committee meeting, if that would be appropriate. We are happy to do that. If there are other groups we should be talking to, if there's community groups we should be talking to. I remember one of the obstacles in an earlier poll was public understanding of these issues. We are happy to do that. We are actually, Robert has identified some of the leaders of some of the representatives of vulnerable communities, and we're planning on doing some separate outreach to there, and would love your feedback on that list. But we're just interested in being a resource and helping you all go above and beyond. So are there, you know, in terms of next steps in our engagement within Waltham, any recommendations you have or love to hear?
Yeah, this is George speaking. I think that since there are so many new counselors, I think it'd be great if you could come in at a future meeting and give a presentation of what your group is. Obviously, I know, but there's a lot of new people, and maybe some examples of the collaboration that you have offered with other towns in the watershed. And I think that'd be great. Maybe in May, or if not the spring, maybe in September or October.
Okay.
That'd
Great.
be wonderful.
Should we work with you on that? Or
sure. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to submit that resolution, and then for you to speak in the committee of the whole to all the counselors. And this is
Wonderful.
recorded on TV. It's on cable, so it would be great for you.
Fabulous. And we can work with you to tailor the presentation, whatever you think is, you know, do more of this, less of this, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the you mentioned the cheesecake,
Brooke. Yep.
Yeah, I mean that'd be a great discussion point, and then in discussion about the dams, and just, I mean, your presentation tonight had historical footage of the floods on Linden Street in 2010, and a lot of these councils weren't even living in Waltham then. So I think that'd be great to refresh their memory, to say, hey, this is what happened 10 years ago. This is what's going to happen within the next 10 years. So that'd be wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? And thank you. I see Mark has a recommendation in the chat that there's a Mothers Out Front chapter and a group called Waltham Energy and Climate Action Now. So we'll look into that as well.
Great name. I like that.
So it's a little after 8. We did want to be respectful of people's time, and particularly how zoomed out we all are, and keep it to an hour. So we're about at that. One more chance for question or comment.
No, I think we're good. I just one other item. I just think about, you're talking about public participation and education. So as part of that MVP program that we're doing, there is a public outreach part of that. And
yes.
we've done a survey. So we're just getting the results back from that. So we'll have some good information from the public.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you making the time and the terrific questions and comments, and looking forward to working with you. Happy for our past partnerships, and really looking forward to deepening that, and you know, just boosting the quality and protection of the Charles River, but also protecting people and property in Waltham as we face real challenges ahead. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.